Greetings everyone, my name is Etterville, and I welcome you all to my Let's Play of StarBreak, a 2D online multiplayer roguelite action platformer developed and published by Crunchy Games. Now, as a brief bit of history with my experiences with this game, I did make a Let's Play of this title a few months back, but I scrapped it because I wasn't impressed with what I did. The commentary was a little bit off, and the video and audio quality were a bit sketchy. So now, here I am a few months back with a lot more experience, so here I'll be trying out the game. Well, playing through to the end of the game, hopefully. Now, within the few months of me last trying the game, there have been a ton of updates in terms of character customization, progression, itemization. There have been several new dungeons, and a final region added. So there's a bunch of new stuff I'll be going through, as well as old stuff. This will be a semi-blind playthrough because I've completed the Fire Forest, the Fungus Cave, and the Mechanical Base before, as well as the Elite Fire Forest. But there are 6 or 7 areas left to go, as well as playing as 2 of the other character types. So there's a bunch of stuff I'm not experienced with, so my apologies if I fail quite a bit. So that's kind of understandable because, well, I'm going to be inexperienced with some of those things. But alas, without further ado, let's go and get into the game itself. You can actually play this game using the web client or the Steam client. I'll be using the web client, mainly because it's a bit easier to configure for me. For this game, you can play using either the keyboard or the controller. I'll be playing using the keyboard, but I strongly suggest that you play using the controller, as this is a tight controlling action platformer, so precision is key for survival, especially in the later areas of the game. And I suggest if you're playing on the keyboard, rebind the modifier button from left shift to A, and switch to interact with it from A to E, so it makes it a lot easier to get through a lot of these segments. For me, it's a personal preference because otherwise it's harder to use the modifier. And it's really important for a lot of the tertiary or secondary abilities for the shells or classes in this game. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the title itself. Now, you may have noticed I'm signed in as a new Spark. I did actually create an account and completed the Fire Forest 2 times, but there were some issues with that recording, so I'll be redoing it. Following this part 1, in part 2 I'll go back to my main account and continue on from there on. So my apologies if there are some discrepancies in terms of treasures, items, or progression. But for the beginning of the parts of the game, it doesn't really matter because there's not that much strength or great gear they can get. But in later parts of the game, restarting can be kind of painful. Okay, without further ado, with all this prehistory, let's do it. And no, I'm not sponsored while doing this game. I'm playing this game at my own volition and enjoyment. Although this may be kind of a sporadic series because of how difficult the later segments can get. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes of talking, or 4 minutes, let's go. Here we're loading up to the first segment. We started the Soul Station several eons ago. So before I get into this is the tutorial segment of this game. Unlike a few months ago, you can actually skip it by pressing the H key, or whatever your home rebind key is set to, or home hotkey is set to. We can move around by using the arrow keys. I'll mainly be talking about the keyboard controller, more so than anything else. Let's take a look at our character. We play as an Ancient One, basically one of the last biological humans. And the name of our character, even though it's not mentioned here, is Brink. We have all these pop-ups showing how you can interact with these segments. Space to jump, press down and space to go through these platforms, and D to fire. I do like the tutorial segment of this game, as it actually shows you how to go through each of these segments. As in other games, you would have to go read through another tutorial where there's more interruptions in the gameplay. But here it's smoothly integrated to the tutorial where it has those monitors, so if you get stuck, you can just see what you need to do next and better understand what's going wrong, or etc. So I do appreciate it. Okay, enough of that. Sorry about the delay. Here's our first enemy, a harvester. Basically, the main backstory behind this mission, a tutorial mission, is that humanity is doing its final last stand against the harvesters, aka these aliens. And in the background we have all the spaceships between humans and harvesters fighting, and there's Earth being in its last defense, and the Sun. Here is showing us how to use our secondary. In this case we picked up a frag. Hilariously, we can also unequip our ancient gun, but it's not recommended. So we have the ancient grenade, our secondary frag weapon. You basically throw it in an arc. It does 4,000 to 6,000 points of damage, and our ancient gun, which does an extreme amount of damage. Remember those stats for later. They will be important, especially when you get to your main classes in the game, but you won't get as powerful gear in the main game, that's for sure. And you may notice in the background there are some floating pieces. Those are dead ancient bodies happening. So we basically have a human fleet of ships versus the harvester fleet of ships. Here's showing us that we can actually attack in all directions. It's nice that the harvesters just stand around and move slowly so we can easily get used to controls. Here's one of the only harvesters who can actually fire back at you. Now the harvesters only do 50 points of damage each, so it's almost impossible to die. Even if you do somehow die, well, you'll get taken back to the beginning of the tutorial, although it's extremely difficult to happen. Here's a nice background of what's going on. Here we're fighting a mini-boss, this giant harvester alien. Not too difficult. I mean, you saw over there I completely destroyed it in a few rounds. Normally this would take in the original version of the game, which I played a few months back, it was a lot more durable, but here it's a lot simpler. Here it's showing you, it's trying to teach you how to dodge those projectiles as well as use your secondaries. And it's also teaching you here that you can pick up new guns. And mini-bosses will always drop better loot. Same with bosses. So here we have the most overpowered weapon in the tutorial, the ancient super gun, which is a spread gun, so it'll tear through everything. Please note in the main game this will not be possible without a whole bunch of allied players. And here we're at the end of the tutorial. Here we see all the ancient dead bodies. And before I attack this alien master, take a note of this ship in the ship schematic shown in the monitor. That'll be important later on near the end of the game. Let's attack this alien. We can't do anything. Oh, and note what happened to the sun. Yep, the harvesters just blew up the sun. So yeah, Earth is destroyed and all of the harvester and allied ships in this region are dead too. We took 10,000 HP and humanity's has been destroyed. Well, that was the past eons ago. Now, several eons in the present, we manifest as our soul back in Eschaton Station. Probably at different times comparing to different players. And so, we can now manifest as our first shell, or class in the game. There are currently, at the time of this recording, 4 shells or classes you can play as. The first one you're directed to manifest as is the Wildfire, a balanced ranged shell that dispatches enemies from a distance, and this is the best choice for beginners. Especially with some changes made throughout the few months from last time I played the game, it's a much better choice for beginners, and a lot easier to play through. So now we're going into Eschaton Station. Basically our main place, the main hub world of this game, and the main point of where it has portals connecting to the main points of interest in the Harvester fleet. It is here where we're going to start a revenge against the Harvesters for destroying Earth, as well as the countless of other alien species that have been destroyed by the Harvesters. So here are our much more nerfed stats. On the left we can see all our various stats like our level, max level, shell, the Mach, armor, movement, jump height, a whole bunch of different stats. Right now, the greater the stats the better, but especially when you get a bit more epic gear, and you have a lot of gear to choose from, it'll become a lot more important to learn how to use our stuff. And in the background you can see a whole bunch of players running around. So yeah, this is cooperative, so make sure to play together. After all, there is permadeath in this game. If you die, you lose all of your progress in your shell, and all of the stuff in your inventory. You can still stash up to 6 items, but even then it's quite limited, so be careful and be cautious while traversing through the world. Don't feel guilty of having to teleport back to Eschaton Station by using the home key. Although, as a warning, it takes 10 seconds of uninterrupted damage to teleport out, so be careful while trying to teleport so you don't get fragged or instantly killed in some areas. That has happened to me a few times before. Okay, with that out of the way, here's our Wildfire. We start out with a shotgun. we used to start out with a repeater, although this makes it a little bit easier, a frag, which acted like those frags in the tutorial, and the blast. The blast sends us in the reverse direction of where we go. To use the blast, basically use your modifier key and one of the directional keys. When you use the modifier plus right, you'll get blasted to the left. So you'll be blasted in whichever opposite direction of which button you pressed. So let's follow this directional arrow and go to our first mission, the Fire Forest. The Fire Forest is one of the surfaces of many worlds that have been controlled by the Harvesters, and these are vast forests filled with primitive life forms. What the Harvesters are doing here is trying to harvest resources for their universal galactic conquest. So it's here at a beginning quest to thwart their goals and save the world, or save the universe, and prevent other races from falling to the same fate of humanity and other ones. Okay, let's do this. Oh, and you can only chat if you're registered. You can't chat if you're a non-registered player like I am. But that'll be fixed in the next part. Okay, here we play. Here we're in the world. Here over there we have those hoppers. They basically hop in your general direction. The Fire Forest enemies are relatively easy to deal with. They're not too dangerous to dispatch. They're relatively slow and they have very telegraph maneuvers. So, a nice place to start with the game. Here we have the pink gobbler, which fires a fireball in an arcing pattern, and there was a bull hopper, which charges at you after a short charging period. Here we go through doors with our friends. When you're playing through this game, make sure to play with friends so you don't die as much. After all, the bosses are really challenging. After several changes in the game, it's much easier to go through the Fire Forest as a solo player. Not so much the boss, but before it was so much more difficult to play or complete the Fire Forest as an individual player, but thanks to changes in the drop rate, it's a lot simpler. And I quite appreciate what Crunchy Games did, as originally the game is very difficult to get through as a new player, and you died quite a bit. But now, it's a lot simpler to complete, or at least a lot simpler to go through the tutorial segment. Here we have spiders and a lot more of these hoppers. Gobblers. The brown gobblers will only fire directly as horizontal at your position. And by the way, if you played this game a few months ago, the stages have been quite changed in terms of their layouts. Essentially, each of these stages is procedurally generated in terms of there's a set number of rooms that can be generated in this game. In this case, this is one of the mini boss rooms. So you'll usually get a different configuration of rooms throughout your playtime of the game. Over here we have one of our first mini boss fights. The Mother Hopper, who fires these fireballs at you and can spawn all of these mini hoppers. This is a lot more dangerous configuration of where to fight her, because usually you would fight her up on a hill, but here you have to fight her on these floating platforms and all these spikes. But alas, after you defeat a boss, you get a lot of their gear. And you usually get better gear compared to before. Sadly, we lost several players, so always be careful, and we don't have as many players as before because I'm playing on a non-peak time, so be careful while trying to defeat these foes. If you do get a repeater weapon, I strongly suggest you switch to that one first, as playing as a shotgun is kind of dangerous as a newbie. Shotguns comparatively are high DPS, but they're very short range, and so they're high risk, high reward. Repeaters are faster firing weapons and have a medium range, but they do a medium amount of DPS. It's a trade-off between DPS and survivability personally. But as a starting player, I strongly suggest you switch to a repeater so you get better used to it and you don't have to go up in front of all sorts of enemies. Once you get used to the enemy patterns, switch to a shotgun. After all, you die pretty fast in this game. Sure, the enemies were kind of nerfed in terms of damage, but still you can easily get killed if you're not careful. Before, these enemies did 10 to 12 points of damage, but now they deal only 8 to 7, so it makes it a lot simpler to deal with these. Also, if you see the pathways that go off the beaten path to the main boss gate, make sure to visit these, as they usually contain good pieces of gear or energy crystals, which is the main currency in this game. Oh, and by the way, those fireballs that the pink hoppers spawn, they do have an explosive radius, so be careful. Oh, if you see a big door like this one, that's usually an indication that you're reaching the boss. If you're not prepared for fighting the boss, like you're too low on health or you feel like you don't have enough allies, make sure to teleport out by pressing the H key, or whatever your home key is binded to. But if you feel prepared and you have enough allies, let's head right on through. I will go through this stage again once more so I can actually show off the enemies, because usually when you teleport into a already existing portal, you're taken to where most of the other players are at. So in that case, I skipped past almost half the level. So I will go back and replay the level so I can show where the new places are. Oh boy, this is not really the best situation. You shouldn't actually go to the... Usually when fighting the bosses, you shouldn't fight them in a non-group. You really should be fighting them in a group so you survive better. The Leaping Lobster has now 3 forms. Before, the Leaping Lobster had only 1 form, but now it has 3 forms. The Leaping Lobster summons these mini lobsters which move around this field. Before, they used to move around a lot faster and were thus a lot more difficult to take care of, and were the most dangerous part of the fight. But now they've been slowed down and nerfed in terms of damage. Now they deal only 4 points of damage, so that's appreciated. In the first phase of the Leaping Lobster, which I'll show off in the second run, it usually jumps around the region slowly, going left and right. And it'll slowly shoot arcing fireballs as well. In the second phase, after it deals enough damage, it'll go into a cocoon and hatch into its flight phase, where it'll fly around and try hurting you with, try ramming into you. And then when it does enough damage, it'll go into its third phase, where it'll move around and try dive bombing individual players. But alas, you weren't able to see it because I was able to destroy it so quickly. Oh good, extra gear. I want to upgrade it to the R-Blast, which is another shotgun. Especially at the beginning stages, even if you don't have the correct shell in order to use the gear, I strongly suggest that you pick it up anyway, because you may find something useful for other shells or classes. Now, there are no level restrictions on the gear, so you can go to the final stage of the game, collect the awesome gear, and save it up for other classes, and then when you die and you switch to those other shells, you can immediately equip those awesome gear. So let me store all this stuff. Here, if you go into this door, you can store up to 6 items in your stash. So I'm basically stashing everything that I can't equip. I don't really need the shotgun because it's the basic level gear and everything else, and basically you'll always start out with that. So I'll just trash it. Now, originally in this game, you only started out with 6 slots of gear in your inventory. That's been increased to 8, so that's quite appreciated. It makes it more convenient to organize stuff. You can also buy extra gear slots with real-world money, with Universal Credits or UC or whatever it's called, but I'd rather just save up with normal gear because those are really expensive. I mean, by default, using the normal conversion rates, it costs $4 to buy 6 more slots of inventory, which I feel is kind of a rip-off, personally. If it was $1 or $2, I would have liked it, but I would have liked the ability to actually unlock another slot with EC, like maybe 1000 EC for another slot, or something to add to the progression, as it really makes the game smooth in more frequently and makes it easier to get back in if you die. But that's my personal opinion. If you get better at the game, it doesn't become as bad. And as long as you store gear for one other class, it's fine. It's when you have to store gear for 2 other classes, it's where things get a little bit more problematic for storing stuff. Okay, I only showed the Flower Forest once, so let's do it again. After all, I didn't really get to show off the beginning. If I can't really show the beginning segment enough, then I'll just do it again. As you can see over here, because I was a bit tardy there, I skipped past most of the enemies. Or skip past quite a bit of the stage. Here are these spiders, which spawn these, whatever those bubbles are, and they do a bit of damage. Here are those floating spiders over there, which fire those grenades, which explode, and are quite more dangerous compared to the normal red lobsters. I mean red gobblers. Goblins, sorry. But always go through these stages with friends. It makes it a lot simpler because enemies will have to switch between choosing who to attack. Oh, and by the way, the spikes were nerfed as well. They used to do about 10 points of damage, now they do 5. As I was saying, always go in groups so you have a better chance of surviving all these stages. As otherwise, enemies will usually just target you and it's very easy to get stun locked to death. Sure, you do have an invulnerability time, but because of how much damage enemies deal, you can die very easily in this game, especially in higher levels. The first stage has been made a lot easier in terms of difficulty, with the difficulty being moved on to the Vanquish stage. But if you're not careful, you can very easily die. That's what I'm saying. And by the way, don't worry about kill-stealing enemies or stealing enemy gear. Any treasures dropped by enemies are shared throughout all of the player base, so you don't need to worry about stealing stuff. So which is pretty nice. I'll definitely take some outer equipment of talents. And here we have a whole bunch of other players. I believe we have fabricators, and we have more wildfires. Here's the Mother Goblin. She fires those fireballs, which can split up into those hexagonal patterns, and she can summon those smaller goblins. Really, if you stay close range enough to her and dodge these shots, it should be fine. She can also fire those fireballs which hit the bottom and then split, so be careful. Oh, here's a Manticore repeater. I'll take the Custom Hearst, the Macron. I'll take the Empowered Blast because it allows me to do 4 blasts. And we can also take the Manticore repeater, which I'll show off. Ooh, this is a spread gun. Usually the Manticore repeater, the normal ones, only fire 1 shot, but this modified version, aka a better version, can actually fire 2 shots at once. So I will definitely use that. Now, what the 4 blasts show in the custom Empowered Blast is that you can use the blast 4 times before having to hit the ground again. So, oh, never mind. I can only use the Empowered Blast 2 times. The Air Blast +1 says I can use the blast 1+1 times, and the Blast 4 shows that it'll create 4 blasts of energy when I use it. So yeah, it makes speedrunning a lot easier. Although I really should catch up with the fellow players and not be left behind, so I can better show off the boss. And considering this is kind of a temporary account, I'll ignore most of the other items and equipment because I already have good enough equipment in the main area. Oh, by the way, these things I'm collecting over here, those are boosts. They are your main form of stat progression in this game. In addition to getting better equipment, you can actually gain boosts, as you see over here, which boosts up one of 8 stats. HP, ammo, damage, armor, speed, jump, critical percent, and critical multiplier. Collect as many as possible because they will make your character stronger and stronger, and better suited to take care of the enemies or hazards in each of the stages. Now, I'll explain more of the boost system in a later part, specifically part 2 or 3, but bear in mind that you can only collect up to boosts up to a certain tier. Like in the easy stages like the Fire Forest, you can only collect up to boosts up to tier 1. You need to go to the Fungus Cave or the Vanquish stage in order to get a gear that's better. Or get gear that's actually tier 2 so you can go up to the tier 2 boost level. In the first stage of this boss, as I was saying, it fires these fireballs from its upper parts in the arcing pattern, and it can summon those mini lobsters. For some reason, it's supposed to jump after a while, but apparently it isn't. Okay, there it is. So when it signals that it's jumping, make sure to get out of the way so you don't get hurt too bad. Once it deals enough damage, it'll go into the cocoon phase, and it'll fly upwards, and it'll fly sideways, horizontally, trying to ram into you, while creating those fireballs at the lower side. This isn't too bad. I would say it's even easier than the first phase as long as you're careful, because the fireballs don't fire in an arcing pattern. They only fire directly upwards or diagonally. Or they fire slightly horizontally, with a little bit of directional influence. Whoa. Okay, now let's move on to its third phase. In its third phase, it'll start dive bombing onto selected players. It'll move upwards, and then it'll start dive bombing. So just be careful and see where it's going, and you should be fine. Oh, and use your secondaries by pressing S. They're really useful, but you only have a limited number of frags you can use, so be cautious on that as well. Thankfully though, the boss has been kind of nerfed in terms of how much damage you can do. But invulnerability time in this game is kind of short, so if you do get hit, make sure to get out of the way as quickly as possible so you don't die. At last, we've completed the Fire Forest again. Once you complete a dungeon or mission, you get some experience. For the first 5 or 6 missions, you can only complete it a limited number of times to gain experience. The rest, after you complete those limited number of times, you won't get any more experience. This doesn't apply to the upper half in terms of difficulty, the upper half difficulty stages. And the equipment and the experience you get is important for getting the boosts, or for unlocking other shells, because those are level locked. I will take that especially. I'll take the experimental blast and I'll get out of here. So it's time to get back to Eschaton. Here you can actually get out of the get to home by just pressing H, but if you move or take damage, you're knocked right out of it. Thankfully, in the home world, you have infinite ammo, so you can practice what your gear is. But of course, as it says over there, you have a limited number of gear you can, or secondaries you can spawn in Eschaton Station. This is mainly used to prevent abuse from other players or to lag the game out. Here, as you can see, we get the experimental improved frag, one of the other experimental gear, which has max ammo +1, armor pierce 100%, and trisected. Basically, once it hits the foe, it'll explode 3 times in a triangular pattern. Usually, when you collect if you defeat a mini-boss, you'll get gear which has 1 extra effect. If you defeat a boss in a normal stage, you'll get gear with 2 extra effects, not to mention gear that's 1 tier higher. And if you do an elite stage, you have the chance for getting gear with 3 modifiers. So yeah, the harder the stages to complete, the more crazy gear you can collect. So that's one of the motivations for going to higher level stages and not settling with gear that's just good enough. Even though there's a lot of crazy gear you can get in this game, even if you die, because of the stash system and how much the drop rate of this game has been boosted, losing isn't that painful, especially as you retain some experience, or you retain all the experience you gain, the stash items, and the skills from other stages. And even with that, in several months ago, it was a lot more difficult to restart, especially with the lower drop rate of boosts and equipment. But that's been buffed quite a bit in this version of the game. So boosts and equipment drop almost like candy at times, and they drop at a semi-rare rate. And mini bosses and bosses are now guaranteed to drop pretty good gear. So there's that. So if you're not really comfortable with other stages, do boss hunting on lower stages so you can get better gear. Usually your main weaponry, special, and body. As a new player, I strongly suggest you upgrade your main, secondary, and body first. Mobility and special are secondary in terms of that, because you really want more defense and better ways of taking care of enemies. And here's the character screen. As you can see here, I maxed out tier 1 for max HP, ammo, jump, and crit times. So I won't be able to level them up further until I go to a tier 2 mission. But I can still collect boosts for damage, armor, speed, and crit percentage, and those are randomly dropped by enemies or chests. Usually with chests and bosses and tougher enemies having a higher % chance of dropping boosts in addition to equipment. And I'll talk more about the boost system in a later part. Well then, to summarize what I did, I completed the Brink tutorial and I completed the Fire Forest 2 times. During the next part, I'll complete the Vanquish mission and explain more of the game's mechanics. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day. Toodles!